I'm Rhett Lewis, and this is NFL Inside Report. The NFL Annual League meeting down in Palm Beach, Florida has now come and gone with some major actionable items. Perhaps chief among them, overtime is in fact changing. You get a possession. You get a possession. Everybody gets a possession. At least one, but only in the postseason. We're going to dig into all of it with my good pal, friend of the program, and of course our NFL media colleague here, Mike Giardi. Michael, hello.
Rhett, how are you, sir?
I'm wonderful. Watched your great work on NFL Now all this week, and excited to chat about some of these things that we saw go down. I mean, like the NFL league meeting is like a treasure trove of headlines and newsworthy items that come from just about every single owner, GM, head coach. I mean, the head coach photo has become a news item. Like that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with here. But look, I think one of the biggest things, in addition to the NFL forming a new committee to review diversity and hiring practices in the NFL and some other amendments to the Rooney Rule that we've been talking about and keeping that rolling and trying to keep fortifying it, was the amendment to the overtime rule, which, as I mentioned, now guarantees each team a possession. Only in the postseason. Everything that you saw last year about overtime in the regular season will remain in the regular season. But in the postseason, we will, I guess, no longer have what happened in the Chiefs-Bills game, right? Where, you had Josh Allen guide the Bills down, throw another touchdown pass to Gabriel Davis in the final minute of the fourth quarter. And then with 13 seconds left, the Chiefs got themselves into field goal range. Harrison Butker kicks a field goal. We go to OT. Chiefs win the toss, score in the first possession, game over. And everybody's like, oh, what, we were robbed of Josh Allen. Let me ask you this to kickstart this conversation here, Mike. The way that both defenses were playing late in that game, Chiefs go down and score first possession of overtime, kick it to the Bills. Bills go down and score first possession of overtime. It's tied. Chiefs get the ball again. Score again, game over, same result.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, so I understand why people wanted to see this continue and wanted, you got caught up in the moment. You want Josh Allen to get the ball the way it was going. But I just go back to the original thing. And I understand the coin toss. Hold them to a field goal, at least with the original rules that were in place. Yeah. Hold them to a field goal. You get the ball back. Your defense has to make a stop there. And to your point now, these defenses are pretty tired by that point and hadn't been exposed in that game in particular. There's no question that both teams, in my mind, were going to go down and score touchdowns. So then it's going to be Kansas City's ball, to your point, with, hey, go 30 yards, kick a field goal, game's over, and that's that. So I didn't see the need really to change it. And I know Siciliano had a point on NFL Now yesterday about, I think it's 52% of the teams that won the coin toss have won the game, which is not a stark number. I know it's a lot different in the playoffs where it's like 10-2. I think if you won the coin toss, you win in overtime. Sure. Yeah, but to me, just make a stop. Just that's part of football. You got to make a stop. And now we're kind of extending it out. I think the other thing here, and I guess I understand now why they're not going to do it in regular season, is you're just adding more playing time, which we talk about player safety all the time. And you can say whether they're really into player safety or not. But now you're adding that element where the game is dragging on longer. We've added another game in the regular season, and now you're just exposing these guys to just a little bit more over the course of a very long season.
And that's a good point too, because that's probably the biggest red flag on a potential. Well, let's just let them play another 10 minutes. Let's just play the whole 10 minutes and see what happens. Well, because we could be tied again at 10 minutes. Then what? Play another 10. And we're into, 7 overtimes here at some point. So like I understand that part of it too. But, Brandon Beane, GM of the Buffalo Bills, who, has done a phenomenal job rebuilding that franchise and building them into a consistent winner and a dominant force now in the AFC East, which is certainly saying something considering the Patriots' reign of success in that division, said he first thought of the rule change actually when the Patriots played the Chiefs back in 2019. Surely, seeing Josh Allen not get a possession, his quarterback in overtime, this past year certainly played a big role. So I don't know. Are Bills fans happy today? I mean, they're happy for a lot of reasons, but are they happy about overtime?
I mean, I guess, yeah, you get your guy to have the ball one more time, so you get to see that part of it. But I don't know that again. It really
Comes down to
necessarily
defense.
solves everything, right? And
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned the Chiefs thing because the Patriots Chiefs game, there was big outcry after that because Mahomes had been on fire in the second half of
Right.
that game, and you're like, well, now you took the ball out of his hands, but their proposal didn't go anywhere in the aftermath of that. So it took a few more years to get something punched through where at least both teams get the ball. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, I don't hate it. I still am of the mind of just make a stop, hold them to 3, not 7, and give your guy a chance.
Okay, let's talk about the other big newsworthy item surrounding the Buffalo Bills that comes out of the annual league meeting, which was the announcement from the Pagula Sports and Entertainment Group of an agreement on a new $1.4 billion stadium, 30-year lease, groundbreaking set for next spring, and would tentatively be set to open and be ready to play in 2026. Will still be an open air stadium and will still be there in Orchard Park. I think we all knew that a new stadium was desperately needed there in the Buffalo area, and now they got it. This seems like a pretty good deal.
It certainly does. And to me, the big thing about it, Red, is the 30-year lease, right? Because the Bills have been one of those teams every few years you get rumblings. Well, if we don't get this or, we can't improve the infrastructure here, maybe we think about going somewhere else. I mean, I think it was just a couple of years ago where that sort of was floating around the NFL about
Toronto,
potentially, yeah, about
yeah.
potentially moving. And now I think obviously with a 30-year lease, I'm assuming that's ironclad and they're locked in pretty good. And that's great because that's a terrific region. They love their football team. But let me just say this, Rhett. I am going to miss the old stadium. I think that there are very few places in the National Football League that are as unique as that stadium is, that gives such a great home field advantage. The way it's built, it's sort of into the ground, and you've been there, you know what it's like.
Mhm.
I've told people this before, and I've been to every stadium except for the new Los Angeles one and the new Vegas one. And the loudest place that I have ever been is in Buffalo.
Wow.
Those people, when their team is winning, particularly considering the rivalry with the Patriots, when they're beating the Patriots, is it's incredible. And I remember a game. I think it was 2011. They intercepted Brady 4 times. Ryan Fitzpatrick was the quarterback, and to quote Al Michaels, that's when sound had feel. It hit you in the chest, and it absolutely just went right through your body. It gave me goosebumps. It was just one of those things. I think that's as unique a stadium as there is in the National Football League. And I know that there'll be better amenities and bigger locker rooms and all these things that the modern NFL and the modern athlete wants. But there's something about that place that's very, very special. And I'll be curious to see if they can replicate the advantage they had in that stadium with the fans being right on top of you. And it really is something there.
Yeah. So, like, you're covering the Patriots there. Bills beat the Patriots, and you walk into the smallest and most, like,
Truly.
egregiously outdated visitors' locker room with a, like, despondent group of players that are, devastated, and you're trying to step over them literally and try to, like, you're hiding in someone's locker to talk to someone next to in the locker. I mean, like, that I will not miss
No.
about Highmark Stadium, for sure. But I don't know, maybe they could just bring that back and just be like, "Hey, it's part of the nostalgia of
Hey,
the
well,
old Ralph."
yeah, I mean, think about how some of these away locker rooms are anyway, right? They're not trying to make you're not getting the creature
Yeah, it's gonna
comforts.
be
This is we're
comfortable.
not
Yeah,
making this
yeah.
spacious. We're going to put you on top. We want you to hate each other by the time you're done in our locker room. They expanded that locker room about 5 years ago, and they made a second room, which is about just as small as the first room. But now they're 2 rooms, offense, defense.
I got you. Yeah, that's nice. Some expansion.
It's
Nice.
really
I hadn't
sweet.
been there in a while,
Yes.
actually. Okay, so on the Bills, though, Josh Allen, obviously catalyst for that team, face of that franchise. But then they go and sign a Super Bowl MVP and a guy who could become just the second player ever to get a third ring with 3 different teams in Von Miller. What does this do for this team? Like, does this more so than the overtime change? Does this allow them to beat the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs and finally make that move, into real Super Bowl contention here?
Well, for starters, I mean, that's an issue that as they've built this team and done such a terrific job, as you mentioned, Brandon Bean and this 5-year build with Sean McDermott and how they've done it. The thing that they have lacked pretty much this entire time is that guy screaming off the edge that's capable of changing a game, and Von Miller is that guy. So from that vantage point, I think it made all the sense in the world. But to me, I dig deeper with this, and I say, and I was reporting it around the time of the combine that there were some agents of prominent defensive players that had reached out to the Bills, not vice versa. They had reached out to the Bills and said, "My guy's interested in your franchise and your team." And to me, Buffalo has become a destination, and it's part of the build, right? And putting this team together that has now been in the playoffs 4 or 5 years and has given the Chiefs a run for their money in each of the last two. But it's Josh, right? That people look at that guy and say, Josh Allen is the dude. He's the guy. He can run, he can throw, he leads, his teammates love him. Like, I want to be on that guy's side, because when I look at that guy, I think there are going to be multiple Super Bowl titles in Buffalo. And, there are some people, especially where I'm located in New England, who say, oh, he just took the money. He took the money. Well, in reality, it's a 2-year deal. They can get out of it
Right.
after 2 years, certainly 3 for no cost. So 3 years and $51 million for someone who is playing still at a high level. And maybe that third year, you don't get the sort of production you want from him. But I think they got to feel pretty good about what they're going to get from him in year one and year two. And I think it signals to everybody. If you didn't already know that we're someone to be reckoned with, we are now, and we're attracting people to Buffalo to play for the Mafia, to play with Josh Allen. And I don't know, I know there's a lot that's happened here in the offseason, and there's still plenty more to go. But to me, they're the best team in the AFC right now.
Yeah, especially if they keep those primary core pieces together, right? Obviously it's not just Josh Allen, but it's his number one target,
Yes.
Stefon Diggs. How do you think Brandon Bean was taking to little brother's recruitment of Big Brother to come down to Dallas? Talking about Trayvon Diggs' Twitter recruitment of his brother.
Yeah, Brass probably didn't go over that great. And I think the interesting thing with Diggs is that now he's criminally underpaid, right? Because of what happened to the receiver market
Yep.
in the last 2 years, really, but certainly this offseason. And it's been something that has been brought up a number of times to Bean about, do you feel the need to get an extension done with Diggs? And I think obviously they would love to. As he said, it's got to be something that works for both sides. So I guess Steph can be pretty private about this stuff, but I guess we'll have to see where his head is at. But certainly to this point, he has loved playing in Buffalo and loved playing with Josh. So, but that's certainly something I think we definitely, Red, have to keep an eye on moving forward. Will there be talks? What do those talks look like? And can they get close enough to convince him to stay, or does he have that longing to go play with his brother? I mean, that's not, that wouldn't be shocking. I know the
Right.
McCourtys, they eventually united. That's something that they wanted to do at some point. They did it. We'll have to see if the Diggs
Yeah.
brothers want to do that as well.
Yeah, but certainly a huge piece of a now back-to-back run as AFC East champions. That a distinction usually reserved for the New England Patriots, who have now not won a playoff game in 3 years,
Mhm.
as we were made aware of by their owner, Robert Kraft, down at
Yes.
the annual league meeting this week. And we will get into that and the Patriots' pursuit of regaining that AFC East crown, as well as some interesting moves, but not unfamiliar, along that Patriots coaching staff next. All right, back here with you on NFL Inside Report, talking about the AFC East a little bit with Mike Giardi. Certainly covered this division for a long time, knows the Patriots inside and out. We were just talking about the Bills, and as the Patriots now try to get back to the top of the division, they're doing so in some unique ways. They've lost a bunch of coaches and executives over the course of the last few years. Price of success, right? Most recently, Josh McDaniels leaving to become the new head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, though, are back after unsuccessful runs as head coaches outside of New England. But what we do have now is the lack of title, which, again, is nothing new in New England. No DC, no offensive coordinator. Still not totally sure who's calling plays right on either side. What do you
Right.
make of all this shakeup here by Belichick?
This to me, Red, is it's a gamble, because you transition from Brady. You had the 1 year with Cam Newton as the sort of the filler, and then you've reset essentially with Mac Jones, and he had a promising rookie year. And now we always talk about in Belichick primarily the leap between year 1 and 2. That's what you want to see, this big jump, and that there should be a big jump for good players. And Mac Jones is a good player, so he was shepherded along nicely by Josh McDaniels, who met with him after every drive. The right to the bench, right with the tablet, talk things over. One of the things they loved about Mac is the ability to adjust on the fly. Those conversations, being able to translate them to the field. Well, now who's doing that with him? And there is no clarity from Bill Belichick on that front. In fact, when he said, "Are you going to work with quarterbacks more?" Bill Belichick, he said, "Yeah, I'll continue to work with him as he's done. He meets with the quarterbacks at least once a week." But then he said, "Matt, as in Matt Patricia, will do some, and Joe Judge, who's an offensive assistant, he will do some." And then internally, I know there are some people there that were hoping that Nick Caley, who's the tight ends coach and has sort of been on this nice path, that he would be the one in charge of at least the passing game, if not the offensive coordinator. So is somehow he involved in this? We don't have any answers. And as Belichick said, we don't have to call plays for a while. So we're going to be waiting and seeing how that all plays out. But to me, it's massive because you can't afford a step back here. I think your owner just made it clear he doesn't want to step back. He expects them to contend. I believe that was his word, contend this year. So that's critical to me. And I think there are people around the league that are sort of scratching their heads saying, should they have done more for Mac in terms of the coaching? Should they have gotten in a real offensive coordinator? Bill O'Brien's a name that was kicked around, and I think there was some mutual interest, but there's also the relationship between Belichick and Saban. And do I want to poach your guy only if you give me, your
Right.
approval? So, yeah, I think it's fascinating. I don't, we look oftentimes we look at the head coach, right? Well, how's this new head coach going to handle the situation? His first job, can he? Well, now we're going to be looking at these assistants and how it all breaks down, and are we seeing improvement in important players to the Patriots? Because if we're not, um, I don't know. The division's gotten tougher and tougher. You're now chasing the Bills. The gap between you and the Bills is fairly sizable based on the
Right.
last two meetings when you did not force them to punt. In fact, you haven't forced them to punt in 10 quarters now. So, yeah, there's some work to do for sure.
So who do you think the leading candidate is to call plays, at least offensively? Right? Because we've seen, Steve Belichick, we've seen Gerard Mayo
Yep.
call plays, defensively. But what about offensively? Like, is it could it be Joe Judge?
I think it could be Joe Judge, or I think it could be a combination of Joe and Nick.
Yeah.
Cayley, sort of, you're the passing game guy, I'm the running
In a
game
part of the
guy.
system. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, is that an effective way of doing things? I mean, you look at Miami this past year. At one point, they had three different guys calling plays. They had
That's
their
right.
co-offensive coordinators and their quarterbacks coach. I believe they were what were they 1-8 or 1-7 at one point. So
Yeah.
it took a long time for that to sort of
Settle out.
materialize and be effective. So I don't think the Patriots can afford to be in that sort of hole. So again, I'm really curious to see how it works out. And if you're looking at Joe Judge's history, obviously the head coach, but the offense with him as the head coach was pretty putrid over 2 seasons with the Giants. And
Yeah.
I threw out a stat yesterday. Daniel Jones's rookie year, 12 games, 24 touchdown passes. In the next 25 games with Joe Judge as the head coach, he threw 21 touchdown passes. Now, that's not all on the coach. That's
No, of
not
course
all on
not.
Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different pieces. But if you're looking for progress, you didn't see it there on a Joe Judge team with a young quarterback.
Right. Okay. And then, as you mentioned, and as we talked about with Robert Kraft coming out and talking about he's a fan of the New England Patriots first, and like many of the fans, realizing that they have not won a playoff game now in 3 years after making, quite frankly, a habit of that over the
Yes.
previous, 18 years, if you will, or 17. Um, Last year he came out and said that he was kind of critical of the way that the Patriots had drafted about this time, and then this year it's like, no, feel like I like what we did in last year's draft. I feel like this is a tactic. He wants to be here next year in at the annual meeting talking about how they won a playoff game. Right? It worked. Calling out the drafting, better draft. Calling him out for not winning a playoff game. We win a playoff game. I mean, it's all going to happen, right?
Yeah, well, it has a potential to happen, Red, if they get the jumps from players like Mac Jones that I mentioned, but also I think, and you're looking at their relative inactivity in free agency, they spent a ton last year. And some of those players, Nelson Aguilar, John Smith in particular, did not play to the level of the contract that they were getting, and did not make the impact, I think, necessary for this team to take that next step. So to me, and this is part of, you can say this is spin or this is the truth. Well, something lies in between, but this was a 2-year project with this group. We spent big because there was the COVID and we had money and other teams didn't have money. And we knew we weren't going to have as much money in year 2 here of this, Bill. But to us, this was a 2-year process. And those guys in particular have to elevate their game and become the players that they're being paid to be,
Yeah.
in order for this team to sort of take that next step and maybe be the team that wins a playoff game. But um, look, I have a lot of questions about their roster. They've lost a lot of good players, or important pieces to their team and past success, and they have done very little to replace that. I mean, I guess their big offseason acquisitions thus far are the Winovich for Mac Wilson trade at linebacker. Wilson sort of
Yeah.
fell out of favor with Cleveland, sort of a bit of a smaller linebacker by their standards, but maybe more speed. And then signing, Jabril Peppers yesterday as sort of a jack of all trades
Yeah.
secondary guy. But other than that, it's been a lot of no guarantees,
Right.
roster filler types, maybe come in and compete, a Mitchell at corner or somebody like
Yeah.
that. Like, that's not going to move the needle. They lost JC
Sure.
Jackson. How do you fill that hole? That's, to me, that's still a massive
Right.
void in their defense.
Right. And, look, there's going to be a good player available for them where they're picking in the first round. Are they going to dip the toes back into the wide receiver market in the first round after the N'Keal Harry situation still has not really worked out or resolved itself? As there was trade talk a while ago and still there. And so, yeah, and perhaps there's a corner there as well that might fit in.
Brett, it's
Although,
hard to trade a receiver who has, I think he had 12 catches last year
right,
in year 3.
right.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
what's the value there? Here,
No, there isn't.
I'll give you a 7th. Like,
Conditional.
right,
Seven.
exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
he blocks well, but I don't
Sure.
think that's exactly what you're looking for when you draft a guy in the first round to play wide receiver for you.
No question. The Baltimore Ravens made Lamar Jackson the very last pick of the first round just a few years ago now. And it seems like, ever since he won the MVP in his second season, that we've been talking about a potential contract extension for Lamar Jackson, which, again, has not happened yet. This is complex. There's been a recent lack of availability for Lamar Jackson, although I think we all agree that when healthy and when that offense is humming and when the rest of the offense around him is healthy, they're as good as there as an attack as there is in football and as difficult to stop and game plan for in that whole thing. But he doesn't really have an agent. He's kind of negotiating himself. Eric DeCosta talked about that. We know John Harbaugh just got his new contract extension, going to be there for the next 3 years. They all talk about how they love Lamar. But how complicated is this, especially after Deshaun Watson just got $230 million fully guaranteed?
Well, we just heard from the owner, right, in Baltimore, who said, yeah, that really complicates things for everybody, and they were a little bit surprised that that contract is fully guaranteed. And I mean, he got an $80 million raise from the contract he had just signed with Houston, and never really got an opportunity to fulfill for a bunch of different reasons. Obviously, his desire not to play there, and then obviously what's happening in the court system. But to me, the interesting thing about Lamar seems to be taking, and again, we're getting very little from Lamar, so we're just sort of reading between the lines here. He seems to be taking the Kirk Cousins approach. I'm going to maximize my value year to year, get all this guaranteed money, and then eventually, we're going to sit down at the table if you get to this point of multiple franchise tags and say, we're guaranteeing all of this. We're doing this for a long time. And
It's
we're going to
250
make,
million.
yeah,
That's where
we're
we're
going to
starting.
make an
Yeah.
obscene amount of money. There was a post from Lamar about wanting to be
this
a
morning.
billionaire.
Oh, that.
Wanting to be a billionaire.
Yes. Yes.
And God bless you. If you can get it, go get it, my friend. Right.
Me too.
But it does make you wonder about, his approach here and his sort of unwillingness at this point to sit down at the table. It does seem like he wants this to play out year after year until he maximizes every single dollar that he feels like he's worth, and that
Yeah.
puts Baltimore in a bit of a bind as well, right? I mean, I know the cap's going to explode, so you know maybe, and I know the cap can be manipulated in a variety of
Clearly.
ways,
Yeah.
but we'll see how they feel about that getting further and further down the road. And obviously, by betting on himself, he's also putting himself at risk. Not signing a long-term deal. Tomorrow you could break your leg. Tomorrow you could tear up your knee,
Yeah.
and then, you know, are you the same player? Is that money still there for you? But he's at this point he appears clearly willing to bet on himself.
Apparently, Lamar tweeting at you today, Mike, by saying that stop trying to read my mind about my contract.
Hey,
He's
hey,
he's
Lamar, bud. Then why don't you just tell us what you want,
yeah.
right?
Why don't you just tell me what movie
Yeah,
you'd like to see?
exactly.
Um, I he did say this week, I love my Ravens. I don't know who the hell is putting out false narratives out that I'm having thoughts about leaving. Stop trying to read my mind. I I don't know. I mean, surely there are false narratives everywhere about just about everything these days, especially on social media. Um, but the narrative is still very mysterious. Like
Right.
you would feel like he's earned a contract. You feel like the Ravens at this point, the way that they have geared their personnel and their offense around him, would like to give him one. John Harbaugh says that he's really just not interested in it right now. And as you mentioned, that kind of does bring back some of those Kirk Cousins thoughts, who played on 2 straight franchise tags with Washington, then got his free agent. It was an unrestricted free agent, got a fully guaranteed deal. But for me, I mean, like if I'm Lamar, I'm like the starting point is $230 million fully guaranteed. I'm an MVP.
For
Deshaun
sure.
Watson was not an MVP. Look what
Nope.
he's dealing with right now, and look what he got.
Yep. Uh,
So
there's no question. That's probably, and I'm probably shooting a little bit higher than that,
yeah.
right?
Oh
To
yeah, but
your
that's the
point,
minimum.
I've
That's the
been to the
starting point.
playoffs. I won an MVP. Like,
Yeah.
how's 300 million sound? How's
Right.
350 million sound?
Right.
I'm still
Right.
in my prime. I'm still developing. So, um, but like to his, the false narratives. I haven't actually heard anything about him wanting to leave. I
I haven't
think
either. Yeah.
I think it's just pretty clear that he is slow playing this thing. And hey, Lamar, if you want to clear things up, why don't you just tell everybody what you want? That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You can absolutely quell all the speculation. You can stop that by just saying, "This is my thought. This is my process, and this is what I want to do."
Yeah, and like for goodness sakes, like can we not just keep a quarterback on the team that drafted him for once? I mean, my gosh, this
Things
offseason, my head's still spinning as fast as this quarterback carousel was. Mike Giardi there setting us straight with a ton of the news. I mean, like, and then Mike, lastly here, and I'm just going to leave everybody on this. Like, as we were talking about the Patriots getting back to the playoffs, you think about the continuity the Ravens have, the Buffalo Bills. Think about the quarterbacks that are now in the AFC as the gauntlet was thrown down on the Patriots to win a playoff game. Okay. Mahomes,
right.
Russell Wilson now in the AFC, Justin Herbert, Derek Carr. That's all in the AFC West. I mean, like that whole division could make the playoffs, like in its entirety, which would leave, very few spots available for other teams to find their way into the postseason. Then you got the AFC North, with Burrow, with Lamar Jackson. And we'll see what happens now with Cleveland and Deshaun. It is an absolute treacherous path to get to the playoffs and to win a playoff game in the AFC. Just food for thought as we wrap up here with Mike Giardi. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Fred.